2:15 in the afternoon, the Strait of Hormuz. The USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group turned east into the narrowest maritime choke point on Earth. This was not a routine freedom of navigation transit. The United States Navy was pushing 100,000 tons of nuclear-powered steel directly into an active Iranian naval lockdown. Neither side had authorization to fire first. Neither side intended to retreat. Who would blink first was the only question that mattered. The afternoon sun beat down on the massive flight deck. The air was thick with humidity and the heavy smell of aviation fuel. At only 21 miles wide in its narrowest section, the strait was too shallow and too restricted for a carrier to easily maneuver. The stakes were too high for a single mistake. 2:17 in the afternoon. Inside the Combat Information Center of the Ford, the lighting was a dim blue. The air conditioning struggled against the intense heat generated by the server racks. Dozens of radar operators and intelligence specialists stared at their glowing tactical displays. The radar screen showed a cluttered and chaotic environment. Commercial shipping traffic was backed up for miles in every direction. Huge oil tankers sat idle in the water like massive floating targets. The tactical action officer paced slowly behind the primary console. Keep a very close watch on Kesham Island. We are entering their primary threat ring. The senior radar operator nodded without looking away from his screen. Understood. I am searching for fast attack signatures among the civilian clutter. Every sailor in the room knew the rules of engagement perfectly. They were strictly weapons hold. They could not shoot until they were actively fired upon. In the confined waters of the Persian Gulf, taking the first hit could mean losing a major surface combatant. 2:19 in the afternoon, Iranian Coastal Command. 50 miles away, inside a hardened concrete bunker on the rugged coastline, a completely different atmosphere reigned. The room was deathly quiet. A large digital map dominated the front wall of the command center. A blinking red icon represented the American carrier group. Surrounding it were smaller blue icons representing local defensive assets. The sector commander crossed his arms over his chest. He watched the track update every 5 seconds. The Americans were deliberately ignoring the declared exclusion zone. It was a direct and public challenge to their territorial claims. The communications officer turned from his radio station. Commander, the strike group continues on its current bearing. They are not turning back. The commander kept his eyes locked on the digital map, signaled the coastal anti-ship missile batteries. Bring all targeting radars to standby mode. Do not illuminate the American ships yet. Yes. Commander. 2:21 in the afternoon. The American destroyers USS Thomas Hudner and USS McFall moved seamlessly into screening positions ahead of the massive carrier. They were Arleigh Burke-class destroyers. Their primary mission was to act as a shield. They were built to take a missile meant for the Ford. The green water chopped aggressively against their gray steel hulls as they increased their speed to 20 knots. On the flag bridge of the Ford, the strike group admiral looked out over the flat horizon. He held a heavy pair of binoculars but did not raise them to his eyes. He knew the initial threat would not come from over the horizon. It would come from right next door. It would come fast and low. The secure radio clicked. The voice of the Hudner captain came through the overhead speaker. Alpha. This is Bravo. We have solid surface tracks on multiple small vessels forming up near the northern coastline. The admiral pressed the green transmission button on his console. Copy Bravo. Maintain your current track. Do not provoke them. The water ahead looked empty and deceptively calm. It would not stay that way. 2:25 in the afternoon. The Combat Information Center aboard the Ford detected the anomaly first. The senior radar operator leaned closer to his primary screen. 5 new surface contacts appeared simultaneously. They were emerging from the jagged southern coastline of Kesham Island. They were small. They were incredibly fast. The operator spoke into his headset. Tactical. I have multiple high-speed surface contacts. Bearing 045. Range is 12 nautical miles and closing. The tactical action officer stepped up to the console. He studied the glowing green icons. Designate contacts as suspect. Give me a speed track. Contacts are accelerating past 30 knots. Formation is tight. These were not local fishing dhows. These were armed, fast attack craft belonging to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy. They were explicitly designed for this exact type of shallow water harassment. 2:27 in the afternoon. Inside the Iranian coastal bunker, the sector commander watched his digital map update. 5 blue triangles separated from the island coastline. They formed a spearhead pattern. The formation pointed directly at the massive American red icon. The communications officer held his headset tight against his ear. "Commander, the strike group is maintaining its course. They have not altered speed. They are not turning away." The commander nodded slowly. "The Americans are testing our resolve. Instruct the fast attack squadron to maintain their intercept vector. Do not lock weapons. Make them see us." This was the classic asymmetric naval tactic. Swarm the massive capital ship with dozens of small and heavily armed speedboats. Overwhelm their defensive tracking systems with sheer numbers. Force the Americans into a claustrophobic corner where their massive firepower was a liability instead of an asset. 2:29 in the afternoon. The bridge of the ford was perfectly silent, except for the low hum of ventilation fans. The strike group admiral stood by the starboard windows. He could not see the boats yet. The curvature of the earth and the thick ocean haze hid them. But he knew exactly where they were. The radio crackled. It was the captain of the USS Thomas Hudner. "Alpha. Bravo here. We hold 5 fast attack craft on an intercept heading. We are moving to place our hull between them and your position." The admiral kept his voice dead calm. He pressed the transmission button. "Copy Bravo. Hold your fire. Sound the general quarters alarm. All hands to battle stations." But weapons remained strictly on hold. Across the massive carrier and its escorting destroyers, a piercing electronic tone began to pulse. Thousands of sailors moved to their combat stations with practiced precision. Heavy watertight doors slammed shut. Damage control teams prepared high-pressure fire hoses. The tactical weapons officer looked at the admiral. The rules of engagement were a heavy chain around their necks. They had millions of dollars in defensive missiles ready to launch. They had radar-guided gun systems that could shred a small boat in seconds. But they had to wait to be shot at first. 2:30 in the afternoon. The surface of the strait began to churn. The 5 Iranian fast boats cleared the shallow coastal waters. Their powerful outboard engines roared over the sound of the crashing waves. They cut bright white wakes across the dark blue sea. Heavy machine guns and unguided anti-ship rockets were mounted on their forward decks. The crews were completely exposed to the wind and the salt spray. They wore black tactical gear. The lead boat altered its course slightly. It pointed its bow directly at the center mass of the USS Gerald R. Ford. Back in the American radar room, the operator called out the urgent update. Contacts are now at 40 knots. They are on a direct intercept course. The gap between the nuclear carrier and the heavily armed speedboats was closing fast. 2:32 in the afternoon. The USS Thomas Hudner pushed its gas turbine engines to maximum power. The massive steel hull carved a deep trench through the shallow water. It angled directly between the ford and the approaching Iranian swarm. On the bridge of the destroyer, the captain watched the forward optical feeds. The 5 fast attack craft were now clearly visible. They were moving in a perfect wedge formation. White water sprayed heavily from their bows. The radio speaker cracked with static. "Bridge, Combat Information Center. We have visual confirmation. 5 surface contacts. Heavy machine guns are manned. Rocket pods are loaded." The captain gripped the metal railing. He kept his voice steady. "Hold your course. Let them see our hull. Do not give them an opening." The destroyer was a floating fortress of advanced weaponry. But against 5 small targets moving erratically at high speed, the advantage narrowed. The physical mass of the American ship was its best initial defense. 2:33 in the afternoon. Inside the Iranian coastal bunker, the sector commander stared at the main tactical screen. The American destroyers were moving aggressively. They were shielding their carrier perfectly. It was standard naval doctrine. But the commander had another layer to play. The fast boats were the bait. He turned to his weapons officer. "Power up the coastal defense batteries. Warm the targeting radars. I want the Americans to feel our eyes on them." The officer typed a rapid sequence into his computer terminal. "Radars are powering up. We are painting the horizon. Systems are nominal. Hidden along the rocky coastline, massive truck-mounted missile tubes elevated into the firing position. They housed long-range anti-ship cruise missiles. If the Americans fired on the small boats, the shore batteries would unleash a devastating volley. It was a deadly trap. 2:34 in the afternoon. A new and distinct alarm blared through the compartment aboard the Ford. It was a high-pitched, pulsing tone. The sound signaled an electronic illumination. The electronic warfare officer shouted over the noise. Tactical. We are being painted. Shore-based radar systems are active. They are operating in target acquisition mode. The tactical action officer stepped to the center console. The situation had just multiplied in lethality. The fast boats were dangerous, but the shore batteries carried weapons that could break a ship in half. Designate the shore batteries as primary surface threats. Pass the targeting data to the destroyers. Tell them to lock their defensive systems onto those coordinates. The strike group admiral listened from the flag bridge. The electronic web was tightening. Both sides were drawing their weapons, but the rules of engagement remained unchanged. Do not fire first. 2:35 in the afternoon. Aboard the USS McFall, the combat systems officer watched the threat data stream in from the carrier. The shore batteries were active. The fast boats were still closing. He spoke into the command net. We have the shore coordinates. Standard missile systems are online. Close-in weapon systems are in automatic tracking mode. The invisible electronic environment above the strait was now a chaotic storm of hostile energy. American defensive radars locked onto the Iranian missile sites. Iranian targeting radars painted the American hulls. The 5 fast boats continued their high-speed charge. The water between the two opposing forces vanished rapidly. The safety buffer was gone. The ocean was completely unforgiving. 2:36 in the afternoon. The 5 Iranian fast attack craft crossed the invisible 5-mile exclusion line. They ignored every standard maritime warning broadcast on international frequencies. They did not reduce speed. They did not alter course. The lead boat bounced violently over the rolling waves. The hull slammed against the chopped water. The gunner stood completely exposed on the forward deck. He gripped the heavy machine gun tightly. He did not aim it yet. He just held on as the boat carved a path toward the American steel wall. Aboard the USS Thomas Hudner, the bridge crew watched the optical feeds in tense silence. The captain spoke calmly. Issue the final verbal warning. Use bridge-to-bridge channel 16. Tell them to turn away immediately. The communications officer keyed the microphone. Unidentified surface vessels approaching United States naval warships. You are entering a restricted defensive zone. Alter your course immediately to remain clear. If you maintain your current course, you will be subject to defensive measures. There was no response. There was only the static hum of the open channel. 2:37 in the afternoon. Inside the flag bridge of the USS Gerald R. Ford. The air felt heavy. The tactical displays glowed bright green in the dim light. The strike group admiral stood near the center console. He looked at the tactical weapons officer. Status of the fast boats. The officer answered instantly. They are inside 4 miles. Still holding formation, still accelerating. They are testing the perimeter. The admiral clasped his hands behind his back. Confirm our posture. We are weapons tight. Defensive systems are tracking all targets, but we are strictly weapons hold. We cannot fire. The rules of engagement were absolute. The Americans were navigating an international strait, but operating right on the edge of territorial waters. A preemptive strike would be classified as a deliberate escalation. They had to wait for the enemy to pull the trigger. We take the first hit. The admiral said it as a statement. Not a question. The weapons officer nodded. Yes, sir. We must sustain hostile action before engaging the surface contacts or the shore batteries. 2:38 in the afternoon. The Iranian Coastal Command bunker was dead silent. The sector commander watched the digital map. The American ships were not firing. They were holding their discipline. It was exactly what he expected. He turned to his communications officer. The Americans are trapped by their own rules. Order the swarm to tighten their formation. Tell them to aim their weapons, but do not fire. Yes, Commander. The order went out over the encrypted radio network. Out on the water, the 5 speedboats shifted into a tighter wedge. The gunners racked the charging handles on their heavy weapons. The metallic clack echoed over the roar of the outboard engines. They pointed the barrels directly at the gray hull of the USS Thomas Hudner. The provocation was escalating rapidly. It was moving from a navigational hazard to a direct military threat. 2:39 in the afternoon, the distance dropped to 3 miles, then 2.5 miles. Aboard the American destroyer, the close-in weapon system rotated automatically. The white dome of the phalanx cannon whined as it tracked the lead boat. Its 6 barrels aimed downward. It was ready to fire 4,000 rounds per minute. The system was in semi-automatic mode. It only needed a human operator to press one glowing button. The combat systems officer tightened his grip on his console. "Captain, they have weapons pointed at us. We are in lethal range of their unguided rocket pods." The captain did not blink. "Hold your fire. Let the automated systems track. Do not engage." The ocean between the massive warships and the tiny speedboats was shrinking by the second. The margin for error was completely gone. Every sailor on both sides had their finger resting on a trigger. A single misinterpretation of intent would ignite the entire strait. The silence on the radio was louder than the roaring engines. The trap was fully set. 2:40 in the afternoon. The flight deck of the USS Gerald R. Ford erupted in a hurricane of noise and jet exhaust. 2 MH-60 Seahawk helicopters lifted off the carrier deck simultaneously. Their heavy rotor blades beat the humid air into a violent downwash. They banked hard to the port side and dropped close to the ocean surface. Their mission was completely physical. They were not going to shoot. They were going to act as a flying barricade. They would place their airframes directly between the approaching fast boats and the screening destroyers. It was a high-stakes game of aerial blocking. The helicopter pilots pushed their throttles forward. They skimmed just 50 feet above the dark water. Aboard the USS Thomas Hudner, the bridge crew watched the Seahawks streak past their superstructure. The helicopters threw up massive walls of sea spray as they rushed to intercept the Iranian swarm. 2:41 in the afternoon. The Iranian fast attack craft did not slow down. The lead boat commander saw the American helicopters dropping low on the horizon. He pressed his throat microphone. He issued a single command over the encrypted tactical net. Execute pincer maneuver. Split the formation. Drive past the aircraft. The 5 heavily armed speedboats instantly broke their tight wedge. 3 boats banked violently to the north. 2 boats cut hard to the south. They widened their attack front. The American helicopters could not block a scattered formation. The Iranian outboards screamed at maximum revolutions per minute. Their bows bounced high out of the water. The lead helicopter pilot pulled his cyclic stick back. He flared the heavy aircraft directly in the path of the northern group. The rotor wash slammed into the ocean, throwing a blinding mist of salt water over the Iranian speedboats. But the small craft did not flinch. They steered right through the artificial storm. The heavy machine gun on the lead boat tracked the belly of the American helicopter, inside the coastal command bunker. The sector commander watched the blue triangle separate on his digital map. His tactical plan was working perfectly. The American defensive perimeter was stretching. The center was opening. He turned to his weapons officer. "The target is exposed. Lock the coastal defense missiles onto the carrier. Do not fire, but make their warning systems scream. Locking primary target now." 2:42 in the afternoon. The distance between the Iranian fast boats and the American destroyers dropped to 1.5 miles. The margin of safety evaporated completely. The electronic warfare officer aboard the Ford shouted his update. "We have hard lock. Shore batteries are painting us with terminal guidance radar. Missiles are active on the rails." The strike group admiral gripped the edge of the center console. The air in the room was heavy. The radar screens were a mess of hostile tracks. The shore batteries were ready to launch. The fast boats were inside the defensive perimeter. The American ships were fully exposed. "Maintain weapons. Hold." The admiral kept his voice absolutely flat. "No one fires until we are hit. That is an absolute order." Out on the water, the close-in weapon systems on the destroyers tracked the incoming speedboats. The automated turrets whirred and clicked as they calculated lead angles. The phalanx cannons were ready to unleash a wall of depleted uranium shells. The Iranian gunners had their fingers on the heavy machine gun triggers. Their unguided rocket pods were armed and active. Both sides were fully committed to their vectors. The ocean between them was gone. The collision was imminent. 2:43 in the afternoon, the gap was now under 1 mile. The ocean evaporated between the two forces. The Iranian speedboats rode the heavy swells. Their outboard engines screamed at maximum power. Salt water washed over their forward decks. The gunners wiped their eyes. They kept their weapons completely level. The barrels of their heavy machine guns pointed directly at the bridge of the USS Thomas Hudner. Aboard the American destroyer, the captain stood motionless. He watched the high-definition optical feed. The faces of the Iranian sailors were clearly visible. He could see their black tactical vests. He could see their hands tight on the weapon grips. The phalanx close-in weapon system whined continuously. Its white dome swiveled in violent micro-movements. It tracked the bouncing targets perfectly. It was a digital predator waiting for permission to kill. To the south, the USS McFall tracked the other half of the pincer maneuver. Its vertical launch silos were primed. 2:43 and 15 seconds in the afternoon. Deep inside the concrete command bunker, the air was completely still. The sector commander watched his digital map. The blue and red icons were indistinguishable. They occupied the exact same grid square. His communications officer was completely rigid. His weapons officer had his hand hovering over the red launch sequence button. The targeting telemetry flooded their screens. Target lock is solid. The officer spoke in a rapid monotone. Terminal guidance is active. We have a firing solution on the American carrier. Shore batteries report all tubes are hot, ready to fire. The commander did not reply immediately. He watched the American discipline hold. The massive gray warships did not shoot first. They were daring him to cross the ultimate line. On the rocky cliffs above the strait, the massive truck-mounted missile tubes pointed at the sky. The hydraulics hummed. The smell of diesel fuel and ozone hung in the hot air. The Iranian missile crews waited for the final word. 2:43 and 30 seconds in the afternoon. Inside the Combat Information Center of the Ford. The noise was deafening. The threat alarms formed a solid wall of piercing sound. It was the highest pitch available. It meant imminent destruction. The electronic warfare officer shouted over the electronic chaos. "We are still painted." Hardlock maintained. "Missiles are active on the rails." The tactical action officer looked at the admiral. The strike group admiral did not break his stance. He was a statue carved from solid stone. "Weapons hold. We take the first hit. Maintain the perimeter." Millions of pounds of highly explosive aviation fuel sat on the flight deck above their heads. 2 nuclear reactors hummed deep below their feet. They were a floating city waiting to be struck. Up on the flight deck, damage control teams in heavy silver heat suits braced against the bulkheads. They gripped their high-pressure fire hoses. They stared at the empty blue sky. They waited for the incoming vapor trails. 2:43 and 45 seconds in the afternoon. The 2 American helicopters hovered desperately low. Their heavy rotor blades created blinding hurricanes of thick sea spray. The Iranian boats cut right through the artificial mist. The lead fast attack craft surged ahead of its formation. It closed the final distance. 500 yards. 400 yards. 300 yards. The gunner tightened his finger on the heavy trigger mechanism. The American automated cannon waited for the muzzle flash. The Iranian missile batteries waited for the American cannon. It was a terrifying chain of pure destruction. Every single link was pulled perfectly tight. The strait was seconds away from a massive inferno. The air itself felt ready to detonate. The standoff was absolute. No one moved. No one blinked. The entire world held its breath. Then, 2:44 in the afternoon, the radar screens aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford flashed a massive new warning. It was not a missile. It was not a fast attack craft. It was a civilian identifier code. The automatic identification system screamed an emergency collision alert. Just outside the primary engagement zone, a Liberian-flagged supertanker was transiting the civilian corridor. It was 330 meters long. It carried 2 million barrels of crude oil. And it had just suffered a catastrophic loss of steering control. The massive ship was dead in the water, but carrying immense forward momentum. Its rudder was locked hard to starboard. The steel behemoth was sliding sideways across the narrow strait. It was moving directly into the path of the Iranian fast attack formation. 2:44 and 15 seconds in the afternoon. On the bridge of the USS Thomas Hudner, the captain heard the collision alarm over the tactical net. He looked past the incoming speedboats. A mountain of black steel was emerging from the ocean haze. It was the supertanker. It was drifting perfectly between his destroyer and the Iranian swarm. The captain shouted the order, "Hard to port! Take us out of their drift path!" Emergency thrust. The helmsman spun the wheel. The gas turbine engines roared. The destroyer heeled violently to the left. The automated phalanx cannon broke its tracking lock. The line of sight to the Iranian boats was completely severed by the civilian supertanker. 2:44 and 30 seconds in the afternoon. The lead Iranian fast attack boat faced a sudden and impossible choice. The American warship was gone. In its place was a solid wall of civilian steel, towering 6 stories above the water. The supertanker was dragging a massive wake as it drifted sideways. The Iranian boat commander screamed into his radio, "Break formation! Break formation! Pull back!" He threw his throttle into hard reverse. The speedboat slammed into the churning water. The bow dipped dangerously low. Salt water flooded over the deck. The gunner was thrown backward. He lost his grip on the heavy machine gun. The other 4 boats scattered in absolute panic. They carved desperate arcs away from the crushing mass of the drifting oil tanker. Their attack vector was completely destroyed. 2:44 and 45 seconds in the afternoon. Inside the Iranian coastal bunker, the tactical picture turned into chaos. The massive radar signature of the supertanker overwhelmed the delicate targeting sensors. The blue triangles of their fast boats were scattering. The red icons of the American ships were moving evasively. The weapons officer frantically tapped his keyboard. "Commander, we have lost terminal guidance. The civilian ship is blocking the target data. The missile lock is broken." The sector commander stared at the screen. The perfect trap was shattered by 300,000 tons of dumb luck. If he fired now, the shore-based missiles would strike the oil tanker. It would cause the largest environmental disaster in history. He slammed his fist onto the console. "Hold fire. I repeat, hold fire. Stand down the missile batteries immediately." 2:45 in the afternoon. On the flag bridge of the USS Gerald R. Ford, the strike group admiral exhaled slowly. The threat alarms stopped their piercing scream. The radar screens showed the massive civilian ship sitting directly in the middle of the battle space. It was a completely accidental shield. The tactical action officer wiped sweat from his forehead. Shore battery radar lock is dropped. The fast boats are retreating from the tanker wake. They are turning south. The admiral nodded. "Maintain defensive posture. Keep the helicopters low. Let the destroyers realign. We just got very lucky." The lethal chain was broken. The physical reality of the crowded strait had intervened before the first shot could be fired. But the standoff was not over. They were still trapped in a narrow channel with heavily armed adversaries. 2:46 in the afternoon. The USS Thomas Hudner carved a hard left turn. The gas turbine engines pushed the massive warship to 25 knots. The captain watched the civilian supertanker slide past their starboard side. The distance was less than 400 yards. It was terrifyingly close for ships of this size. The steel wall of the oil tanker completely blocked their view of the Iranian speedboats. The tactical net was silent for the first time in 20 minutes. The immediate focus shifted from combat engagement to basic seamanship. Avoiding a multi-ship collision in shallow water was now the primary mission. 2:47 in the afternoon. On the other side of the drifting behemoth, the 5 Iranian speedboats fought for survival in the turbulent water. The supertanker dragged a massive and chaotic wake behind its hull. The lead Iranian boat hit a steep swell and slammed hard into the trough. The fiberglass hull shuddered violently. The heavy machine gunner clung to his weapon mount to keep from being thrown overboard. The boat commander keyed his radio. His voice was breathless. He ordered his squadron to fall back to the territorial line. They could not re-establish a firing formation in these sea conditions. The physical obstruction was absolute. 2:48 in the afternoon. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Gerald R. Ford, the tactical picture was completely degraded. The radar screens showed a massive shadow cast by the civilian supertanker. The electronic warfare officer monitored the threat frequencies. He turned toward the tactical action officer. "We have 0 radar illumination from the shore batteries. The terminal guidance lock is broken. The physical mass of the tanker is blocking their line of sight." The strike group admiral let out a slow breath. He ordered the 2 airborne helicopters to maintain a high hover. He wanted eyes over the top of the civilian ship. They needed to know if the fast boats were going to try another run. 2:49 in the afternoon. The Iranian Coastal Command bunker was a room of controlled chaos. The weapons officer stared at his blank targeting screen. He shook his head. "Commander, the civilian vessel is masking the American carrier completely. We cannot reacquire the target without repositioning the mobile launchers, and we risk hitting the oil tanker if we fire." The sector commander stood motionless. He looked at the digital map. The blue icons of his fast boats were retreating south. The red icons of the American warships were sliding east. The moment of maximum pressure had passed. He made the only logical decision. Power down the targeting radars. Keep the launch tubes elevated, but secure the firing circuits. The engagement window is closed. 2:50 in the afternoon. The ocean between the 2 opposing forces was now occupied by a disabled merchant ship. The immediate threat of missile fire was gone, but the tension remained suffocating. The USS McFall moved carefully to rejoin the screening formation. The American carrier reduced its speed to 15 knots to navigate the congested channel. Both sides were still fully armed. Every sailor was still at their battle station. But the psychological escalation chain was broken. The presence of the drifting supertanker forced both militaries to prioritize navigation over destruction. The narrow strait had saved them from themselves. 2:55 in the afternoon. The massive black hull of the Liberian supertanker continued its slow and uncontrolled drift. It effectively walled off the northern half of the strait. The 5 Iranian fast attack craft bobbed heavily in the churning water. They had retreated to the absolute edge of their territorial boundary. The physical toll of the high-speed maneuvers showed on the faces of the crews. They were completely soaked in salt water. The heavy smell of unburned fuel hung in the humid air. Their powerful outboard engines idled loudly. The gunners slowly lowered their weapons. The adrenaline was burning out of their systems. The lead boat commander pressed his radio switch. His voice shook slightly. "Base, this is Squadron Leader. We have lost visual contact with the primary targets. The civilian hazard is blocking our path. We are holding position at the boundary line." The response came back through the static. "Copy. Hold your position. Do not re-engage." 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The bow of the USS Gerald R. Ford finally cleared the stern of the drifting oil tanker. The sheer size of the nuclear carrier dwarfed even the massive merchant vessel. Up on the flight deck, the heavy silver heat suits of the damage control teams glinted in the afternoon sun. They slowly lowered their high-pressure hoses. On the flag bridge, the strike group admiral watched the tanker slide behind their wake. The threat environment was changing rapidly. The tactical action officer read the latest data from his primary screen. "Sir, we have clean water ahead. The Iranian surface contacts are holding stationary at 3 nautical miles. Shore battery radar emissions remain at absolute 0. The admiral nodded slowly. The tight muscles in his jaw finally relaxed. "Recall the helicopters. Get them back on the deck. Keep the destroyers in screening formation until we completely clear the territorial buffer. Do not lower our defensive posture yet." 3:05 in the afternoon. The air inside the Iranian Coastal Command bunker felt lighter. The crushing psychological pressure of the last 40 minutes was slowly venting from the concrete room. The sector commander stood with his hands completely still behind his back. He watched the digital map on the front wall. The blue icons of his speedboats formed a neat and disciplined line along the maritime border. The red icons of the American warships were steadily moving east. They were leaving the narrowest part of the choke point. He had pushed the world's most powerful navy to the absolute edge of a shooting war. He had proven his point, and he had not lost a single boat. The communications officer looked up from his console. "Commander, Squadron leader requests permission to return to base on Keshem Island. The commander took a deep breath. Granted. Tell them to return at normal cruising speed. Keep the shore batteries powered down. The Americans are out of the trap. 3:10 in the afternoon. The USS Thomas Hudner accelerated to 25 knots. The guided missile destroyer cut a clean white path toward the open expanse of the Gulf of Oman. Inside the Combat Information Center, the threat alarms were finally silent. Only the low hum of the server racks remained. The sailors sat rigidly at their electronic consoles. The adrenaline of the near miss was beginning to fade rapidly. It was replaced by a deep and heavy exhaustion. They had stared directly into a wall of incoming fire. They had held their ground without pulling the trigger. The discipline had held, but the silence that followed felt incredibly fragile. It felt temporary. The physical danger of the strait was now behind them. The geopolitical shockwave of the encounter was just beginning to form. 5 o'clock in the evening, the Gulf of Oman, the USS Gerald R. Ford reached the safety of deep water. The massive nuclear carrier finally had room to maneuver. The escorting destroyers widened their defensive perimeter. The claustrophobic walls of the narrow strait were far behind them. The immediate threat of a short-range ambush evaporated. On the flag bridge, the strike group admiral stood by the starboard windows. He took a long and slow breath. The intense physical pressure in his chest began to subside. He turned to the tactical action officer. Secure from general quarters. Stand down the weapon systems. Return to normal cruising status. The order echoed across the secure radio network. Deep inside the ship, the piercing combat alarms were finally deactivated. The heavy steel watertight doors swung open. 5,000 American sailors stepped away from their battle stations. They wiped sweat from their faces. They had faced a barrage of missiles and machine guns. They had not fired a single shot. The discipline had held perfectly. 5:30 in the evening, Keshem Island Naval Base. The 5 Iranian fast attack craft idled toward the concrete pier. Their fiberglass hulls were coated in thick white salt. The crews tied heavy mooring lines to the iron cleats. They climbed onto the dock in absolute silence. Their legs shook from the adrenaline crash. Inside the Coastal Command bunker, the sector commander stood in front of his digital map. The red icons of the American strike group were gone. The screen showed only local civilian traffic. His communications officer approached with a printed status report. Commander, Tehran is requesting a full operational summary. They want to know why the Americans were not engaged. The commander took the paper. His expression remained completely flat. Tell command that we successfully defended the exclusion zone. Tell them the Americans retreated behind a civilian merchant vessel to avoid our weapons. We forced them to yield. It was the narrative that command wanted to hear. But the commander knew the absolute truth. The Americans did not yield. The trap simply broke. A random civilian collision saved both nations from a devastating war. 3 days later, the Pentagon, deep underground in a secure briefing room, intelligence analysts reviewed the digital telemetry. The massive screens showed the exact radar tracks of the encounter. They watched the blue and red icons merge on the display. A senior naval intelligence officer addressed the silent room. The margin of error was exactly 0. The Iranian swarm tactics are highly synchronized. Their coastal defense batteries achieved a hard terminal lock on a moving carrier. We cannot rely on drifting oil tankers to save a 100,000-ton ship. The room remained completely quiet. The strategic reality was harsh. The United States Navy possessed overwhelming firepower. But in the confined space of the Strait of Hormuz, that firepower was severely neutralized. The small and cheap weapons held an undeniable asymmetric advantage. The balance of power was quietly shifting. 1 week later, the Strait of Hormuz. The ocean was calm. Huge commercial cargo ships navigated the narrow channel. The burning sun reflected off the dark water. There were no burning holes resting on the shallow bottom. There was no oil slick choking the coastline. The world moved on, completely unaware of the catastrophe it had avoided. The history books would likely record the standoff as a routine navigational hazard. But the professional warriors on both sides remembered. They understood the terrifying speed of modern naval combat. They knew how easily the chain of destruction could be activated. They recognized the immense courage required to hold a weapon without pulling the trigger. No missiles flew, no ships were lost. But history shifted anyway. When the absolute line was crossed, both sides chose restraint over annihilation. Modern warfare is decided not by who fires first. It is decided by who chooses not to fire at all.